They dragged her out of the hospital in silence. No sirens, no shouting, just the cold click of handcuffs around the wrists of the woman who had saved more lives than anyone in that building. They called her a thief, a liability, a nurse who didn't know her place. What they didn't know was that the sea had already chosen her as its witness, the war had already forged her hands, and the men who survived hell trusted her with their last breath. And when the harbor caught fire and the lights went out, the city would learn a terrifying truth. You never cage the one who knows how to lead in the dark. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with. San Diego looked gentle to tourists, but the city could be merciless after midnight. A cold Pacific wind slid in from the water and threaded itself through the streets like a living thing, carrying salt, diesel, and the faint metallic smell of the harbor. The sky hung low and colorless, the moon hidden behind thick coastal clouds that pressed down on the city, turning the night into a lid rather than a blanket. Along Harbor Drive, the lights of docked ships flickered, steady and indifferent, as if they had seen far worse nights than this one. Mercy Harbor Medical Center rose a few blocks inland, a concrete structure built in the late 70s, all sharp lines and narrow windows. The building looked tired even when freshly cleaned, like a boxer who never quite healed between fights. At night, the emergency department glowed harsh white against the darkness, a lighthouse that didn't promise safety, only work. Inside, the ER hummed with controlled chaos. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Wheels squeaked. Someone coughed behind a thin curtain. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. Elena Crossfield moved through it all without haste and without hesitation. She was 32, average height, with a lean athletic build, shaped not by gyms, but by years of standing, lifting, and bracing herself against urgency. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a tight bun at the base of her neck, streaked faintly with silver that she never bothered to dye. Her skin was pale, weathered slightly by sun and wind, with faint lines at the corners of her eyes that came not from age but from vigilance. Her face was calm in a way that unsettled people who expected warmth from nurses. Elena offered competence instead. Her scrubs were a faded navy blue, clean but worn thin at the seams. On her chest hung her hospital badge, and beneath it, attached with a discreet safety pin, was a small, broken piece of seashell, smoothed by years of touch. Most people assumed it was a charm, something sentimental and harmless. They were wrong. Elena checked vitals at bed 7, adjusted an IV at bed 9, and corrected a medication dosage that had been entered incorrectly by a first-year resident too exhausted to notice. She did it quietly, without comment, the way she did everything. When patients looked at her, really looked, they relaxed. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was steady, low, and unhurried, like someone who understood panic but refused to participate in it. At the main nurses' station stood Sophie Alvarez, a newly hired ER nurse barely 24, all sharp cheekbones and nervous energy. Sophie had curly black hair that refused to stay tied back and eyes that darted constantly, as if the room might change shape if she looked away too long. She watched Elena with something close to awe. "How do you stay so calm?" Sophie asked, glancing toward a trauma bay where a man was shouting in pain. "It's like nothing rattles you." Elena handed her a chart. "Things rattle," she said. "You just don't let them show." Sophie nodded, not entirely convinced, but grateful for the answer. The calm didn't last. The automatic door slid open with a sharp hiss, and the temperature in the ER seemed to drop by several degrees. Dr. Victor Langston entered like a man stepping onto a stage. He was 38, tall, with a lean frame that looked tailored even under hospital scrubs. His hair was blonde, perfectly styled despite the hour, and his jawline was sharp enough to seem deliberate. A faint stubble framed his face, cultivated rather than neglected. His eyes were pale blue and cold, scanning the room not for patience but for confirmation of his authority. Langston had been appointed chief of emergency medicine 3 months earlier, transferred from a prestigious hospital in Palo Alto. His resume was flawless. His bedside manner was not. He walked with long, confident strides, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with entitlement, Behind him trailed Iris Langston, the hospital's chief operations officer and Victor's aunt, a woman in her late 50s, with iron-gray hair cut into a sleek bob and eyes that missed nothing. Iris dressed in neutral tones and carried herself like a woman who measured rooms in terms of leverage. Langston stopped near the nurse's station, his gaze landing on Elena. "Crossfield," he said, his voice carrying easily across the ER. "A word." Elena turned, expression unchanged. "Yes, doctor." His eyes dropped, not to her face but to the seashell pinned beneath her badge. "What is that?" he asked, reaching out and flicking it lightly with his finger. The shell tapped against plastic with a dull click. "This isn't a beach bar. It's a hospital." "It's not in the way," Elena replied calmly. Langston smiled, thin and humorless. "Professional appearance matters. We treat donors here. Board members, people who expect a certain standard." Elena held his gaze. "I meet the dress code?" Iris watched silently, lips pressed together, evaluating. Langston leaned closer. "Remove it," he said, "or I'll write you up for insubordination." For a brief moment, something flickered behind Elena's eyes. Not anger, not fear, but memory. Wind, fire, water turning black with fuel. Her hand rose slowly. She unpinned the shell and slipped it into her pocket. Langston's smile widened. "Good. Now, bed 12, homeless male, intoxicated, no insurance. Stabilize and transfer him out by morning. Mercy's Harbor isn't a shelter." Elena didn't argue. She nodded once and turned away. Sophie stared after her, stunned. "That was normal," Elena said quietly, already moving. Bed 12 belonged to Raymond Cole, a former dock worker in his late 50s, with a gray beard, cracked hands, and eyes dulled by years of sleeping under overpasses. He smelled of alcohol and seawater. His abdomen was rigid with pain, his blood pressure dangerously low. Elena examined him quickly. Internal bleeding, severe. She ordered labs, fluids, imaging, then stayed. When the results came back, she didn't hesitate. She paged a surgical consult directly, bypassing protocol. Raymond lived because she refused to follow orders that night. At 1:47 a.m., Elena's phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. Lila, her younger sister. Elena stepped into the supply room to answer. "Talk to me." Lila's voice was thin, strained. "I didn't want to call, but I'm at St. Anne's. My heart. They say it's worse. They're moving me up the list." Elena closed her eyes. Lila was 26, with Elena's dark hair but softer features, her smile bright despite the congenital heart condition that had shaped her life. A kindergarten teacher who insisted on joy even when her body betrayed her. "Are you in pain?" Elena asked. "Not yet," Lila said, "but I'm scared." "I know," Elena replied. "I'm here. I'll handle it." After the call ended, Elena stayed in the supply room a moment longer, her palm pressed flat against the metal shelf, until her breathing steadied. When she stepped back into the ER, Langston was watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the hospital's windows. The city was restless. And somewhere beyond the harbor, the Pacific did not sleep that night. By the time the clock above the nurse's station crept past 2 a.m., the wind outside Mercy Harbor Medical Center had sharpened, hurling salt-heavy air against the building's glass like a warning. The automatic doors sighed open and shut, with increasing frequency as ambulances arrived in uneven bursts, their red lights painting the ER walls in fleeting streaks of urgency. Inside, the hospital ran on muscle memory. Orders called, hands moved, lives balanced on small, decisive actions. Elena Crossfield was charting when the overhead intercom crackled. "Attention all units, code black, repeat, code black, military transfer inbound, ETA 3 minutes." The words cut through the department like a blade. A code black was rare. It meant federal clearance, restricted access, and patients whose injuries did not come from car crashes or kitchen accidents. It meant war, carried home on stretchers. Conversations stopped. Phones were silenced, even the Dr. Victor Langston straightened, his irritation from earlier replaced by something more alert. Anticipation, perhaps, or the hunger for visibility that lived just beneath his polished surface. "Clear trauma 1, he ordered briskly, already moving. "I want this intake clean. No mistakes." Elena felt it then, a tightening behind her ribs, subtle but unmistakable. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She simply moved toward Trauma 1, checking equipment, adjusting lights, ensuring suction and oxygen were ready. Her hands remembered this rhythm, even if her life pretended otherwise. The doors to the ambulance bay burst open, with a gust of cold air and the unmistakable presence of men trained to own space. They came in first, 4 of them, moving in a formation too disciplined to be accidental. They wore civilian clothes, but nothing about them read civilian. Broad shoulders filled out plain jackets. Their hair was cut short, regulation neat. Their eyes scanned corners and ceiling lines before they registered people. At their center was the patient. He was tall even on the gurney, built solidly through the chest and shoulders, though blood darkened the bandage at his left side. His beard was thick, shot through with gray, framing a face marked by sharp angles and a scar that traced his jaw like a forgotten signature. His eyes, steel blue, clear despite pain, tracked movement with predatory focus. This was Commander Noah Hale. He had the look of a man shaped by long decisions and longer consequences. Years ago, a botched extraction in the Arabian Sea had cost him 3 men. Since then, those who served under him said he carried responsibility the way others carried weapons, always, and with purpose. He spoke little, listened more, and never forgot a face. Langston stepped forward, already assembling his professional smile. "I'm Dr. Victor Langston, Chief of Emergency Medicine. You're in good hands." One of the men flanking the gurney shifted, subtly, blocking Langston's path. He was enormous, barrel-chested, with a shaved head and a beard that made his square face look carved from stone. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but when he spoke, there was humor lurking beneath the gravel. "Hold up, Doc," he said. "We'll decide that in a second." This was Chief Ben Grizzly Maddox, 45, career SEAL, known for breaking bones in combat and tension, in rooms with equal ease. He had once laughed through a gunshot wound, and never quite lost the habit of treating danger like a personal inconvenience. Hale's gaze drifted past Langston, past the monitors and staff, and landed on Elena. Time compressed. For a moment, the ER noise faded, replaced by something older, wind against metal, the roar of engines, the taste of fear and salt water. Hale's brow furrowed. He blinked once, then twice. "Elena?" His voice was rough, strained, but unmistakably certain. "Crossfield?" The room stilled. Elena froze, her fingers tightening imperceptibly around the chart in her hands. She hadn't heard her name spoken like that in years, not with recognition, not with weight. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the sudden pull of memory. "I'm here." Langston frowned, irritation flaring. "Commander, she's a nurse. You need—" Hale cut him off with a sharp glance. "She's the reason I'm still breathing." Ben's mouth twitched. "Told you," he muttered to no one in particular. Langston's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" Hale's eyes never left Elena. "Lieutenant Commander Elena Crossfield," he said, each word deliberate. "Former trauma surgeon, DevGru attachment. She kept my heart beating with one hand while returning fire with the other off the coast of Aden." A murmur rippled through the staff. Elena felt heat rise to her face, not pride, but something closer to exposure. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. Hale's expression softened by a fraction. "Not long enough." The pain caught him then. His jaw clenched, breath hitching, as the gurney rolled forward. Elena moved without thinking, adjusting the IV, checking the pressure on his wound. "Shrapnel," he said through his teeth. "Secondary blast. Didn't trust the medevac to dig it out." Langston stepped in again, bristling. "Commander, with all due respect, we follow civilian protocol here. My team will handle—" "No," Ben said mildly, stepping closer. "Your team will listen." The tension thickened, pressing against the walls. Before Langston could respond, Iris Langston appeared at the edge of the trauma bay. Her posture was rigid, eyes sharp as she assessed the scene. "Victor," she said evenly, "this is federal. Let's not escalate." Elena met Iris's gaze for a brief second. There was calculation there, not concern. Hale was wheeled into Trauma 1. Elena followed. Inside, the lights were bright, unforgiving. Monitors came alive, tracing heartbeats and oxygen levels in green lines. Elena examined the wound quickly, efficiently. The metal was lodged deep, too close to a major vessel. She recognized the pattern instantly. "This isn't standard fragmentation," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's military grade. ceramic coated. If you pull it the usual way, it'll tear the artery. Langston scoffed. We'll consult vascular. No time, Elena said, his pressure's dropping. Hale watched her. Trust absolute. Do it. Langston hesitated. Authority warred with instinct. Finally, he snapped, Fine, I'll assist. The procedure was swift and brutal in its precision. Elena moved with practiced economy, her hands sure, her focus absolute. She rotated the fragment just enough, freed it without rupture, repaired the vessel with movements so exact they bordered on artistry. 8 minutes later, Hale's vitals stabilized. Ben exhaled, relief heavy. Hell of a night. Doc. Elena stepped back, removing her gloves. Her hands were steady. Langston stared at the bloodied instruments, then at her. Something had cracked behind his eyes, not humility, but fear. As Hale was transferred to recovery, his fingers brushed Elena's wrist. You disappeared, he said softly. We looked for you. Elena swallowed. I needed quiet. You never belonged in quiet, he replied. She didn't answer. Outside, the wind continued to batter the city, carrying with it the promise that this night. Morning crept into San Diego without apology. The sky lightened from steel gray to a washed-out blue, and the Pacific wind eased just enough to let the city pretend it was calm again. Inside Mercy Harbor Medical Center, the night shift loosened its grip reluctantly. Coffee machines hissed to life. Charts were signed. Faces that had been sharp with urgency softened into exhaustion. Elena Crossfield finished her notes with the same careful attention she had given the surgery hours earlier. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, the product of habit rather than aesthetics. She documented exactly what had happened in Trauma 1, no embellishment, no defensiveness. Facts had always been her shield. Across the corridor, Dr. Victor Langston stood near the glass wall of the administrative office, speaking in a low, urgent tone into his phone. In the morning light, his flawless appearance looked slightly strained. The sharp angles of his face seemed tighter, the faint stubble darker against skin that hadn't slept. He listened more than he spoke, jaw working, one hand braced against the window as if the building itself might shift under him. When he ended the call, he turned and caught Elena watching, not staring, not challenging, simply aware. Enjoy your moment, he said as he approached, voice smooth again. Military theatrics tend to impress people who don't understand liability. Elena met his gaze. Patients don't survive on liability. Langston smiled thinly. Hospitals do. Before she could respond, Iris Langston emerged from the office. In daylight, Iris looked even more formidable. Tall, shoulders squared, gray hair immaculate. Her tailored blazer emphasized her authority, and her eyes held the flat patience of someone used to winning by attrition rather than force. Elena, Iris said, as if greeting an acquaintance at a fundraiser, we need to talk. The administrative conference room was all glass and polished wood, designed to project transparency without offering any. Iris gestured for Elena to sit, then remained standing herself, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. Last night was unusual, Iris began. Federal involvement complicates optics. Elena waited. Dr. Langston believes, Iris continued carefully, that certain protocols were bypassed. Because following them would have killed the patient, Elena replied. A pause. Iris studied her more closely now, taking in the faded scrubs, the tired eyes that missed nothing. You're aware, Iris said, that your background is unconventional for a civilian ER nurse. Elena felt the weight of the words. My license is valid. For now, Iris said, not a threat, an observation. The meeting ended without resolution. Elena returned to the floor with the familiar sensation of being measured and found inconvenient. Down the hall, Sophie Alvarez intercepted her, eyes wide. They're reviewing your file, she whispered. I heard Victor say something about audits. Elena nodded. Thank you for telling me. What are they going to do? Paperwork, Elena said. It's always paperwork. On the top floor, Commander Noah Hale lay in a private recovery room, sunlight cutting across white sheets. He looked diminished without his boots and gear, but the sharpness in his eyes remained. His beard had been trimmed by hospital staff, revealing the scar along his jaw more clearly. A souvenir from a blade fight years earlier that had ended with 3 men alive instead of 1. Chief Ben Maddox leaned against the window, arms crossed. massive frames somehow managing to look relaxed in a space too small for him. He watched gulls circle the harbor below, expression thoughtful. "They're circling her," Ben said quietly. "I can smell it." Hale exhaled slowly. "They always do." "You want me to make a call?" "Not yet." Hale's gaze drifted to the door. "Elena doesn't like cavalry. She prefers time." As if summoned, Elena entered, carrying a clipboard. She paused briefly when she saw Ben, then continued with professional calm. "How are you feeling?" she asked Hale. "Like I lost an argument with a truck," he replied. His voice softened. "You saved my life. Again." She adjusted his IV. "That's my job." "No," Ben said, turning. "That was loyalty." Elena ignored the comment, but something in her shoulders tightened. "You shouldn't be here," she said to Ben. "You're drawing attention." Ben grinned. "Attention follows us, Doc, like digs." As if on cue, a low bark echoed from the hallway. A moment later, a medium-sized German shepherd appeared, ears alert, coat a mix of tan and black. He wore a service vest and walked with measured discipline. "This is Atlas," Ben said, 4 years old, military working dog, retired after taking shrapnel meant for me. Atlas sat at Ben's heel, eyes intelligent and calm, tail thumping once against the floor. Elena crouched briefly, letting him sniff her hand. He accepted her immediately, pressing his head lightly against her knee. "He knows," Ben said. "Most of them do," Elena replied. The quiet didn't last. Midday brought Compliance Officer Mark Feldman to Mercy Harbor, a compact man in his early 50s with thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a permanent look of polite concern. Feldman had built his career on risk mitigation and believed deeply in the power of forms. "Elena Crossfield," he said, flipping through a tablet as they stood outside the staff lockers. "We're conducting a routine review of medication access logs." Elena understood the implication immediately. "I'll cooperate." He smiled, relieved by her lack of resistance. "Of course, this won't take long." It took longer than he had promised. By late afternoon, whispers had begun to circulate. Medication discrepancies, unusual access, times, questions asked too loudly to be accidental. Elena felt the net tightening, not suddenly, but with the patient inevitability of tides. She finished her shift without incident, though Sophie's eyes followed her with growing worry. Outside, the wind had returned, sharp and insistent. Elena walked to her car, an old sedan parked beneath a flickering light. She sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine, fingers resting against the pocket where the seashell lay. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Be careful, they're setting you up." Elena didn't need to ask who M was. She started the car and drove toward the ocean instead of home, parking along a quiet stretch near Point Loma. The waves crashed hard against the rocks, relentless and honest. Elena stepped out, the wind whipping her hair loose, and let the cold bite into her skin. She had survived worse than paperwork, worse than threats wrapped in policy. But she also knew this. Storms didn't announce themselves until it was too late to pretend they weren't coming. Behind her, Atlas's bark echoed faintly from the hospital grounds, carried on the day turned brittle. San Diego's afternoon sun should have softened the edges of things, but inside Mercy Harbor Medical Center, the air felt thinner, sharper, as if the building itself had learned to hold its breath. Elena Crossfield returned for her evening shift. With the quiet focus of someone who knew, the ground beneath her feet had begun to shift. She wore the same faded navy scrubs, hair pulled back with mechanical precision, posture straight but unshowy. If anyone expected fear to change her, they were disappointed. At the nurse's station, Sophie Alvarez greeted her with a smile that tried too hard. Sophie's shoulders were tense, curls escaping their tie as usual, her dark eyes flicking down the corridor toward administration. "They asked me questions," she whispered, keeping her voice low, "about you, about the night with the military patient." Elena set her bag down. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Sophie said quickly, "that you saved him." Elena nodded once. "That's enough." Across the floor, Mark Feldman, the compliance officer, was back. In daylight, he had seemed merely cautious. Under fluorescent lights, he looked smaller, his thinning hair catching the glare, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose as he studied his tablet. Feldman was the sort of man who had learned early that survival meant never taking a side openly. He believed in rules the way some people believed in prayer, fervently, and without much curiosity about who wrote them. "Elena Crossfield," Feldman called, his voice carrying politely. "I'll need you to step into the medication room." The medication room was windowless and cool, shelves lined with locked drawers and barcode scanners. Feldman gestured toward the counter where a printed report lay waiting. "There are discrepancies," he said, tapping the page. "Access logs tied to your credentials, controlled substances, multiple nights." Elena scanned the report. Times were highlighted, dosages circled. It was clean, efficient, and wrong. "These aren't my pulls," she said calmly. "Some are during procedures I wasn't assigned to." Feldman adjusted his glasses. "The system shows your ID." "Then the system is being used," Elena replied. He hesitated, discomfort flickering. "That's not my determination to make." From the doorway, Dr. Victor Langston watched, arms folded across his chest. In the harsher light, the sharpness of his features seemed exaggerated, the faint stubble on his jaw more pronounced, his eyes glittering with something like vindication. "We can't ignore patterns," he said smoothly, "especially when patient safety is involved." Elena turned to him. "Then look closer." Langston smiled. "We are." The meeting ended without handcuffs or raised voices, but the message landed with precision. Elena's access badge was temporarily restricted. She was reassigned to observation duty, visible, demotion disguised as caution. Upstairs, Commander Noah Hale received the update from Chief Ben Maddox with a grim set to his mouth. Hale sat propped against pillows, broad shoulders still commanding space even in recovery clothes. The sunlight traced the scar along his jaw, catching the edge of old damage. He listened without interrupting, eyes fixed on the harbor beyond the window. "They're laying groundwork," Ben said. "Paper cuts first. Bleed her slow." Hale's fingers curled against the sheets. "She won't bleed." "No," Ben agreed. "But they might try to make her look like she did." Hale reached for his phone, then stopped. Years in command had taught him when action helped and when it only drew fire. "Not yet," he said quietly. "If we move too soon, they'll frame it as interference." Ben snorted. "Everything we do is interference to people like that." Meanwhile, Iris Langston convened a quiet meeting in her office. The room smelled faintly of citrus polish and expensive coffee. Iris sat at her desk, posture immaculate, hands folded. Across from her was Daniel Rourke, the hospital's legal counsel, a slender man in his early 40s with neatly trimmed brown hair and eyes that rarely betrayed opinion. Roark had built his reputation on resolving problems before they reached daylight. "Elena Crossfield is a liability," Iris said without preamble. "Her past invites scrutiny." Rourke leaned back slightly. "She also saved a federal asset, twice by some accounts." "That makes her unpredictable," Iris replied. "And unpredictability is expensive." Rourke nodded. "We'll need something concrete." Outside, Elena completed her reassigned duties with the same thoroughness she brought to everything else. Observation meant watching, patients who were stable but not safe to ignore. It suited her in an ironic way. Watching had always been her strength. Late in the evening, she stepped out for air, walking, toward the ambulance bay where the wind cut through her scrubs. She leaned against the brick wall, pulling the small piece of seashell from her pocket. The edges were smooth now, worn by years of touch. Once, it had been part of a rigid hull, torn loose by force. She wondered briefly which pieces of herself were still rigid and which had learned to break away. A low, familiar sound made her look up. Atlas sat a few feet away, ears forward, amber eyes steady. The German shepherd's coat gleamed under the security lights, black saddle stark against tan fur. He was 4, but carried himself like an older dog, measured, thoughtful. He rose, tail wagging once, then patted closer, resting his head lightly against her thigh. "You shouldn't be here," Elena murmured. Atlas disagreed silently. Ben appeared moments later, massive frame outlined against the open bay. "He slipped his handler," he said with a shrug. "Seems to like you." Elena allowed herself a small smile, brief as, it was genuine. "Smart dog." Ben's expression sobered. "They're moving fast." "I know. You want backup?" "I want time," Elena said. "And the truth." Ben studied her, then nodded. "You always did." Inside, Sophie rushed toward them, breathless. "Elena, there's a call from St. Anne's." Elena's heart tightened. She followed Sophie back to the station and took the call in a quiet alcove. It was Lila's cardiologist, voice careful. "We've had a development," he said. "A possible donor match has come up, but there are complications. Administrative delays, insurance." Elena closed her eyes. How much time? Not much. When the call ended, she stood very still. The hospital sounds pressed in, voices, alarms, footsteps, but they felt distant, muffled. Victor Langston chose that moment to approach. "Personal problems," he said lightly. "Unfortunate timing." Elena met his gaze, something colder than anger settling behind her eyes. "Be careful," she said quietly. "You're standing very close to things you don't understand." Langston laughed softly. "I understand power just fine." He walked away, confident in the shadows he thought he controlled. From the end of the corridor, Iris Langston watched Elena with narrowed eyes, calculation sharpening into resolve. By nightfall, Mercy Harbor hummed with rumors. Medication audits, federal attention, a nurse with a classified past. Stories grew legs quickly in places built on stress and fear. Elena finished her shift and returned to the parking lot under a sky gone dark again. She paused beside her car. The ocean's distant roar carried faintly on the wind. She sensed it now, not panic, not despair, but the deep certainty that lines had been crossed. Storms did not always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they arrived. The arrest came quietly. No sirens, no raised voices, no drama worthy of television. Just two uniformed officers stepping into Mercy Harbor Medical Center shortly after midnight. Their presence announced only by the way conversations thinned around them, the way the air itself seemed to recoil. San Diego outside was wrapped in marine fog, the kind that dulled sound and swallowed distance. The city looked harmless from a distance that night, lights blurred into soft halos, the harbor invisible beyond the white veil. Inside the hospital, however, clarity was sharpening into something dangerous. Elena Crossfield was finishing a set of discharge notes when Sophie Alvarez approached her, face pale beneath the harsh fluorescence. Sophie's usual nervous energy had drained away, leaving her rigid, eyes glossy with fear. "Elena," she whispered, "there are police here. They're asking for you." Elena didn't look surprised. She capped her pen carefully, slid the chart into its holder, and stood. Her movements were unhurried, precise. If fear had arrived, it found no place to land. At the end of the corridor stood Officer Daniel Ruiz and Officer Mark Henson. Ruiz was in his early 40s, Latino, with a thick mustache and tired eyes that had seen too many versions of the same story. He held himself with quiet restraint, the posture of a man who believed in procedure but not necessarily in justice. Henson, younger and broader, watched everything with the alert stiffness of someone still learning how wrong the world could be. "Elena Crossfield?" Ruiz asked. "Yes." "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." His voice was respectful, practiced. "There's been an allegation of controlled substance diversion. We have a warrant to question you." Around them, staff pretended not to listen. No one spoke. No one moved. Victor Langston appeared from the shadows near the nurse's station, impeccably dressed despite the hour. His hair was flawless, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes shone with something close to triumph. "This is unfortunate," he said softly, loud enough for others to hear, "but patient safety must come first." Elena met his gaze for a long moment. "You're making a mistake." Langston smiled. "That remains to be seen." The officers waited. Elena nodded once, reached for her jacket, then paused. She looked at Sophie, who stood frozen, hands clenched at her sides. "Finish the chart for bed 6, Elena said gently. The potassium was trending low. Sophie swallowed hard and nodded. "I will." As Elena was escorted through the ER, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. Suspicion spread faster than truth ever did. By the time the automatic doors slid open, rumors had already begun to shape her into something smaller, something easier to discard. Upstairs, Commander Noah Hale learned of the arrest from Ben Maddox before the doors of the squad car even closed. Hale sat on the edge of his hospital bed, IV disconnected now, boots planted firmly on the floor. His recovery clothes hung loose on his broad frame, beard shadowing a jaw clenched tight enough to ache. The scar along his face stood out, pale against skin gone taut with fury. "They moved," Benna said flatly, "just like we said they would." Hale stood, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs. "Get me dressed." Ben hesitated. "Medical clearance?" "To hell with clearance," Hale snapped. Then his voice lowered. steadier but no less dangerous. They don't get to do this quietly. Ben nodded once. I'll make calls. The interrogation room at the downtown precinct was small and aggressively clean. White walls, metal table, 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Elena sat with her hands folded loosely in front of her, jacket draped over the back of the chair. She looked composed, almost distant, as if observing herself from somewhere above. Officer Ruiz sat across from her, folder open. You understand why you're here. I understand what you're accusing me of, Elena replied, and I understand it's false. Ruiz studied her. You have access. You have motive. Medical debt in your family. Sister with a heart condition. Elena's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. That doesn't make me a criminal. No, Ruiz agreed quietly, but it makes the story neat. He slid photos across the table. Empty vials, access logs, timestamps. Elena examined them carefully. These pulls overlap with my documented presence in Trauma 1 and observation. Check the cameras. Ruiz hesitated. Hospital IT says some footage is missing. Maintenance error. Elena exhaled slowly. Of course it is. Across the city, Iris Langston sat in her office long after midnight, the lights of San Diego glowing beyond the glass. She poured herself a measured amount of whiskey, hands steady. For years, she had believed in managing risk the way others managed inventory: identify, isolate, eliminate. Victor Langston stood opposite her, restless. This will hold, he said. It's clean. Iris's gaze flicked to him. Nothing involving federal attention is clean. Remember that. Meanwhile, Sophie Alvarez sat alone in the hospital locker room, her phone clutched in trembling hands. She replayed footage again and again, grainy security video she'd copied before it could touch it. It showed a figure in scrubs accessing the medication dispenser using Elena's credentials, while Elena herself was visible down the hall, entering Trauma 1. The figure's face was obscured, but the height, the build, the gait. Sophie's stomach twisted. It wasn't Elena. Sophie wiped her eyes and made a decision that scared her more than anything else had that night. She hit send. The message went to Ben Maddox. In the interrogation room, hours passed. Elena answered every question with calm precision. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She simply told the truth, trusting that it would eventually matter. At dawn, Officer Ruiz closed the folder. You're being held pending further investigation, he said quietly. Bail will be set later today. Elena nodded. May I make a call? He hesitated, then slid the phone across the table. Elena dialed from memory. When Lila's voicemail picked up, Elena spoke softly. It's me. I'm okay. Whatever happens, remember that. She hung up before emotion could fracture her composure. As she was led to a holding cell, the fog outside began to lift. Pale sunlight cut through the high windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Elena sat on the narrow bench, hands resting on her knees. She closed her eyes, breathing in 4 counts, out 4 counts, the same rhythm she had used under fire, underwater, in places where panic meant death. She didn't know how long she would be there, but she knew this. Storms that started in silence rarely ended quietly. And somewhere between the harbor and the hospital, forces were already moving that Victor Lang. Dawn did not bring relief. It brought clarity. The fog that had clung to San Diego through the night thinned into ragged ribbons as sunlight crept along the harbor. From the holding cell, Elena Crossfield could not see the water, but she could feel the city waking, the distant growl of traffic, the muted clatter of doors, the hum of systems restarting. Morning always made people braver. It also made them careless. She sat upright on the narrow bench, back straight, hands resting loosely on her knees. The cell smelled faintly of disinfectant and old concrete. A thin blanket lay folded beside her, untouched. She had slept in fragments, the way she had learned to sleep on deployments. 10 minutes here, 20 there, never deep enough to dream. At 7:14 a.m., the lock clicked. Officer Daniel Ruiz appeared at the bars, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. The tired lines around his eyes had deepened, but his voice remained even. You've got visitors. Elena looked up. Legal? Counsel? Ruiz hesitated. Something like that. They led her down a short corridor to an interview room that was identical to the last except for one detail. The American flag stood in the corner, freshly placed. Elena noted it without comment. 2 men waited inside. The first was tall and spare, early 50s, with iron gray hair cut close to his scalp, and a posture that suggested military roots even beneath a civilian suit. His face was long and weathered, eyes sharp and observant, the kind that measured rooms instinctively. This was Special Agent Thomas Keene, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Keene had spent decades untangling messes where military operations intersected with civilian institutions. He had learned early that the most dangerous crimes rarely looked violent at first glance. Beside him sat Laura Whitman, late 40s, assistant U.S. attorney, compact and precise. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, and her tailored blazer matched the seriousness of her expression. Whitman's reputation rested on patience. She preferred airtight cases to dramatic arrests and had little tolerance for ego. "Elena Crossfield," Keene said, standing. "Thank you for meeting with us." Elena inclined her head slightly. "I didn't have much choice." Whitman allowed a thin smile. "Choice is relative. We're here because of a message we received overnight." Keene slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a still image from hospital security footage, grainy, angled, unmistakable. A figure in scrubs accessed the medication dispenser, using Elena's credentials while Elena herself appeared, time-stamped, entering Trauma 1 at the far end of the corridor. Elena studied the image, her pulse steady. "You got the footage?" "We did," Keene said, courtesy of a nurse who decided integrity mattered more than job security. Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Sophie," Whitman nodded. "She took a considerable risk. She always does," Elena said quietly. Keene leaned forward. "This isn't just about you. The moment military patience became leverage in a civilian power struggle, it crossed into our jurisdiction." Elena met his gaze. "You're saying Mercy Harbor is compromised?" "I'm saying," Keene replied, "that someone tried to bury a decorated trauma surgeon with a paper trail. That takes planning." Across town, in a conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and anxiety, Iris Langston faced her own morning reckoning. The board had convened early. 6 men and women in expensive suits, expressions strained. Iris sat at the head of the table, posture impeccable, but the faint tightening at her jaw betrayed irritation. Victor Langston paced near the window, phone pressed to his ear. He looked less composed than usual, blonde hair slightly disheveled, his sharp features drawn. "They have no right," he hissed into the phone. "This is an internal matter." He listened, face paling incrementally. "What do you mean, NCIS?" The call ended. Victor lowered the phone slowly. Iris's eyes flicked to him. "Speak." "They have the footage," Victor said, "and apparently they have federal backing." For the first time, uncertainty cracked Iris's composure. "That wasn't part of the equation." "It is now," Victor replied. His voice carried an edge, fear sharpened into resentment. Years earlier, a surgical error during his residency had nearly ended his career. Iris had intervened then, burying the incident with money and influence. He had learned 2 lessons that day. Mistakes could be erased, and power protected those who wielded it early enough. Back at the precinct, Elena answered questions calmly as Keene and Whitman worked through the timeline. She didn't embellish, she didn't speculate. Facts were enough. At one point, Keene asked, "Why didn't you leave when you realized they were setting you up?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Because innocent people get hurt when you run." Whitman studied her for a long moment. "That may be the most dangerous answer you could have given." Elena met her gaze. "I know." By midday, Elena was released, temporarily. No charges dropped yet, but no holding cell either. Conditions applied, investigations pending. Outside the precinct, the sun was high, burning away the last of the fog. Commander Noah Hale waited by a black SUV, leaning lightly on a cane he refused to acknowledge. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes alert despite the fatigue etched into his face. Beside him stood Ben Maddox, arms crossed. Atlas seated at heel, the dog's ears pricked the moment Elena stepped into view. Hale straightened. "You okay?" Elena nodded. "For now." Ben grinned. "Told you she'd hold." Atlas rose and pressed his head against Elena's hip, tail wagging once, controlled but sincere. She rested a hand briefly on his neck, grounding herself in the solid warmth. "We're not done," Hale said. "They won't stop with this." "I wouldn't expect them to," Elena replied. As if summoned by the thought, Elena's phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. "They're shredding files. Administration offices. I can hear it." Elena showed Hale the screen. "They're panicking." Hale's expression hardened. "Good." The counteroffensive moved quietly after that. Keene's team requested server access under federal authority. Whitman froze asset transfers pending review. Ben contacted old friends, logistics experts who understood digital footprints the way sailors understood currents. Atlas accompanied Elena back to Mercy Harbor, his presence both comfort and warning. Inside the hospital, staff whispered as Elena walked past. Some eyes held suspicion, others held relief. Sophie met her near the lockers, face pale but determined. "I copied everything," Sophie said softly. "Not just the video. Emails, scheduling overrides, access logs that don't match staff assignments." Elena placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," Sophie swallowed. "I'm scared." "So am I," Elena admitted. "That's how you know it matters." In the late afternoon, Iris Langston watched federal agents wheel sealed boxes out of her office. She stood rigid, hands clasped, expression carefully neutral. Years of control had taught her when resistance only made things worse. Victor lingered in the doorway, face tight. "You said you could handle this." "I said I could manage risk," Iris replied coolly. "You made it personal." By sunset, the harbor glowed gold. Elena stood on a balcony outside the ICU, watching the light dance on water she could not quite reach. Hale joined her, the city quieting beneath them. "You didn't have to come back," he said. She glanced at him. "Neither did you." He smiled faintly. "Seems we both have a problem with leaving things unfinished." Below them, Atlas lay with his head on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and machinery. The storm had not broken yet. The call came at 8:42 p.m., when the sun had already slipped behind the Pacific, and San Diego wore its evening calm like a lie. Elena Crossfield was standing in the ICU hallway outside her sister's room at St. Anne's, watching Lila sleep beneath a tangle of wires and quiet machines. The monitors whispered instead of screamed, each steady beat a fragile promise. Lila looked smaller than Elena remembered. Dark hair spread across the pillow, skin translucent, breath shallow but even. 26 years old and already living on borrowed time. Elena's phone vibrated. Mass casualty alert, Mercy Harbor, multiple explosions, Harbor District, ETA first wave, 6 minutes. For a second, the world narrowed to the sound of Lila's breathing. Then training took over. Elena stepped out into the corridor, already dialing. "Hale?" Noah Hale answered on the first ring. "I saw it. Gas pipeline near the docks," Elena said, scanning the alert feed. "Secondary fires, civilian, boats." "I'm 5 minutes out," Hale replied. His voice was calm, but Elena heard the steel beneath it. "You coming?" Elena looked once more through the glass at her sister. Lila's cardiologist, Dr. Susan Patel, stood near the nurse's station, mid-40s, petite, hair streaked with silver, eyes perpetually tired but kind. Patel met Elena's gaze and understood instantly. "Go," Patel said softly. "I'll watch her." Elena didn't hesitate again. She ran. Mercy Harbor Medical Center was already transforming when Elena arrived. Sirens screamed into the night. Smoke rolled in low from the waterfront, carrying the bitter smell of burning fuel and scorched metal. The ER doors burst open again and again, paramedics shouting, firefighters staggering under the weight of the injured. Inside, chaos threatened to take root. Dr. Victor Langston stood near the nurse's station, barking orders that overlapped and contradicted each other. His face was pale, jaw clenched, hands shaking just enough to betray him. This wasn't a controlled environment. This wasn't a stage. This was disaster. "We need triage lines," someone shouted. "Ore is full," another voice yelled back. A gurney slammed into the wall. Someone screamed in pain. Victor froze. Elena saw it the way she had learned to see everything in war. The moment leadership collapsed, she stepped forward. "Listen to me," Elena said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "Red tags to trauma 1 through 3. Yellows to the east wing. If they can walk, they go outside. Airway, breathing, circulation, move." People turned. Sophie Alvarez was already at her side, eyes wide but focused. "What do you need?" "Blood bank access, now." Sophie ran. Victor spun toward Elena. "You don't have authority." Elena met his gaze, something cold and immovable settling into her expression. "Step aside." For a heartbeat, Victor hesitated. Then Commander Noah Hale appeared through the doors, flanked by Ben Maddox and 3 SEALs in plain clothes, sleeves rolled up, faces set. Hale looked older tonight, the lines in his face deeper, beard catching the harsh light, but his posture was unbroken, a man who had walked into worse fires than this. "I'm taking command," Hale said evenly. "Federal Emergency Authority." Victor opened his mouth. Ben moved half a step forward, all quiet menace. Victor closed it. The hospital obeyed. The first wave hit hard. A fisherman with burns across his chest and arms. A teenage girl pulled from the water, hypothermic and barely breathing. A dock worker with shrapnel embedded in his thigh, bleeding fast. Elena moved from patient to patient, hands sure, voice steady, mind already 10 steps ahead. "Tourniquet higher," she told a resident whose hands shook. "You're not hurting him. You're saving him." The resident nodded, swallowed, adjusted. Atlas appeared at Elena's side, guided by Ben. The German shepherd moved with calm purpose, weaving through chaos without fear. He stopped beside a gurney where a woman hyperventilated, pressed his head against her arm. Her breathing slowed. "Good boy," Elena murmured as she passed. Outside, the situation worsened. A secondary explosion rocked the harbor. Windows rattled, the lights flickered. Then they went out. Total darkness swallowed the ER, broken only by emergency red lights that cast the room in a hellish glow. Panic surged. "Phones out," Elena ordered instantly. "Lights on. We keep moving." Dozens of screens lit up, a constellation of pale blue light against smoke and blood. A nurse shouted, "We've got a cardiac arrest. Trauma 2." Elena ran. The patient was a middle-aged man, soot-streaked, chest barely rising, no pulse. "Start compressions," she said. "Now." The resident hesitated. Elena took over without ceremony, hands locking, shoulders rolling with practiced rhythm. "Count with me." They shocked him once, twice. On the third round, the monitor blipped. A pulse. "Good," Elena said, already stepping back. "Next." In the administrative wing, Iris Langston watched the emergency unfold on a security monitor powered by backup generators. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, controlled, composed, furious. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Victor said behind her. His voice was brittle now, stripped of polish. Iris turned slowly. "You pushed too hard." Victor laughed, sharp and hysterical. "You taught me to." Iris said nothing. Some lessons came due with interest. Back in the ER, a call came through that cut deeper than any explosion. St. Anne's Hospital, Dr. Patel. "Elena," Patel said, breathless, "we have a heart, a donor. It's happening now, but we're losing surgical staff. Roads are blocked, smoke everywhere. I need you." Elena closed her eyes for half a second. Around her, people screamed, bled, lived. Hale saw the change in her face immediately. He moved closer, voice low. "What is it?" "My sister," Elena said. "She needs me." Hale looked at the chaos, then back at her. "If you leave, we lose coordination." "If I stay," Elena replied, "I might lose her." They held each other's gaze, 2 soldiers at different fronts. Ben cleared his throat quietly. "We've got this," he said. "You taught us well." Atlas whined softly, pressing closer to Elena's leg. Elena inhaled, exhaled. "No," she said. "We do this together." She turned to Hale. "Get me a helicopter." Hale nodded once. He was already moving. The rooftop was chaos, smoke, wind, rotors screaming as a Coast Guard chopper hovered, lights slicing through the dark. Elena climbed aboard, blood still drying on her sleeves. Hale followed, Cain forgotten. As they lifted off, Mercy Harbor shrank beneath them, still burning, still fighting. They landed at St. Anne's, with minutes to spare. The operating room was a stark contrast, bright, controlled, silent, but for the steady beep of machines. Lila lay prepped, fragile as glass. Elena scrubbed in beside Dr. Patel, hands steady despite everything. This wasn't war medicine. This was precision, patience, hope. Hours passed. When it was done, Elena peeled off her gloves and leaned against the wall, exhaustion crashing in all at once. Patel smiled, tears in her eyes. "The heart is strong. She's stable." Elena sank into a chair, head in her hands. Outside, dawn crept back over the city. By morning, the fires were contained. Noah Hale stood on the roof of Mercy Harbor, watching smoke thin into memory. Federal agents moved through the building below. Victor Langston was escorted out in handcuffs, his face gray, his future evaporated. Iris Langston watched from a distance, expression unreadable, empire collapsing quietly. Elena returned hours later, walking into an ER that looked at her differently now, not with suspicion, but with something like trust. She found Hale near the ambulance bay. "It's over," he said. "No," Elena replied, glancing back toward the hospital. "It's just changed." Hale smiled faintly. "That's usually how it goes." Atlas sat between them, tail thumping once. The harbor still smelled of smoke, but beneath it, morning arrived without sirens. The smoke over San Diego thinned into pale threads that unraveled quietly against a sky washed clean by offshore wind. The harbor no longer burned. Tugboats nudged charred vessels back into place with patient determination, and gulls returned as if nothing extraordinary had happened. From a distance, the city looked almost gentle again, like a fighter lowering its hands after the bell. Inside Mercy Harbor Medical Center, the quiet felt unfamiliar, not empty, earned. Elena Crossfield walked the length of the ER just after sunrise, her steps slower now, fatigue finally allowed to surface. Her scrubs had been changed, but the faint bruises on her wrists from gurneys and long hours remained. Her hair was still pulled back, though loose strands framed her face, catching the light. She looked thinner somehow, not weaker, distilled. Staff paused when they saw her. Some nodded, some smiled, tentative but sincere. Others simply stepped aside, instinctively, making room. Trust had a physical presence, Elena realized. It changed the way hallways breathed. Near the nurse's station, Sophie Alvarez waited, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red-rimmed but bright. She was still young, still learning the cost of doing the right thing, but something in her posture had shifted, her spine straighter, her gaze steadier. "They asked me to give a statement," Sophie said. "Officially." Elena nodded. "You did more than enough." Sophie swallowed. "I'd do it again." "I know," Elena said softly. That was why she trusted her. Atlas lay near the trauma bay entrance, head resting on his paws, amber eyes half-lidded but alert. The German shepherd's coat had been brushed clean sometime overnight, the black and tan gleaming under the softened lights. He lifted his head when Elena passed, tail thumping once against the floor in quiet recognition. Ben Maddox leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed over his broad chest. In daylight, the scars along his knuckles and the faint limp in his stance were more noticeable, reminders of the years that had shaped him. He grinned when he saw Elena. "Hospital's still standing," he said. "City too." Elena exhaled. "That's usually a good sign." Ben's smile faded into something more serious. "They're asking for you upstairs." The executive boardroom no longer smelled of polish and privilege. Now it smelled like burnt coffee and paper. Boxes stacked against the walls, seals broken, files half-packed. Federal agents moved in and out with methodical calm. Iris Langston stood near the window, hands clasped, posture impeccable, even as the world she had curated unraveled around her. She looked older than Elena remembered, not fragile, simply exposed. "You always knew this place ran on pressure," Iris said without turning. "I just believed I could control it." Elena stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at her sides. "Pressure reveals things," she said. "It doesn't create them." Iris turned then, eyes sharp but tired. "Victor made his choices." "Yes," Elena agreed. "And so did you." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Iris inclined her head a fraction. An acknowledgement, not an apology. It was the closest Elena expected to get. At the far end of the table sat Laura Whitman and Thomas Keene, their expressions professional but not unkind. Papers were arranged neatly before them, decisions already crystallizing into ink. "Effective immediately," Whitman said. "Mercy Harbor's emergency department will operate under joint civilian-federal oversight for the next 18 months. Leadership changes are extensive." Keene slid a folder toward Elena. "We'd like you to serve as interim director of emergency and trauma services." Elena looked down at the folder, then back up. "Interim." Keene's mouth twitched. "We don't like to assume consent." Elena thought of the night before, the screams, the fire, the moment she'd chosen not to leave. She thought of quiet shifts and invisible labor, of hallways that had learned her name too late. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition." Whitman raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Ward access," Elena said. "No patient turned away for lack of insurance. And an integrated training program, civilian and military. Skills go both ways." Keene nodded slowly. "Agreed." The meeting ended without ceremony. That, too, felt right. St. Anne's Hospital was bathed in soft afternoon light when Elena arrived later that day. The ICU hummed with steady purpose, the chaos of the night before replaced by careful vigilance. Dr. Susan Patel stood near a glass wall, reviewing charts, her expression lighter than Elena had ever seen it. "She's awake," Patel said, "and asking for you." Lila lay propped against pillows, color returned to her cheeks, eyes bright despite the lines of fatigue etched beneath them. When she saw Elena, she smiled, a real smile, unburdened. "You smell like smoke," Lila said weakly. Elena laughed softly, crossing the room and taking her sister's hand. "You should see the harbor." Lila's grip tightened. "You stayed." "So did you," Elena replied. Patel watched from the doorway, then quietly stepped away, granting them the privacy of survival. As evening settled, Elena returned to the rooftop of Mercy Harbor. The city stretched out before her, lights flickering on as dusk deepened. The Pacific reflected the sky in muted blues and silvers, calm now, deceptively serene. Noah Hale stood near the edge, hands resting on the railing. He wore civilian clothes, a dark jacket over a simple shirt, beard trimmed, but still rugged. The cane leaned against the wall nearby, unused for the moment. The lines in his face remained, but they looked less like scars and more like history. "You always pick high places," Elena said as she approached. Hale smiled faintly. "Old habit, harder to get cornered." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. "They offered me a role," Elena said finally. "I figured they would." "I took it." Hale turned to her fully now. "Good." She studied his face, the angles, the calm steadiness, the weight he carried without complaint. "What about you?" "I'm retiring," he said simply. "Medical grounds, and maybe other reasons." Elena raised an eyebrow. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, resting it in his palm. It was metal, worn smooth by time and salt, shaped into a simple ring. Embedded at its center was a polished fragment of shell, pale, unassuming, unmistakable. "I had it made years ago," Hale said quietly. "Didn't know why, guess I do now." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, not a rush, not a flood, but a steady release. "This isn't an escape," she said. "I know," Hale replied. "It's a promise to stand where you stand." Below them, Atlas padded closer, settling at their feet, tail curling once before stilling. The wind shifted, gentle now, carrying the distant sound of waves against the shore. Elena took a breath, the city warm and alive around her. "Okay," she said. Hale smiled then, not the smile of a commander, but of a man finally at ease. He slipped the ring onto her finger with reverence rather than urgency. They didn't kiss right away. They stood, hands intertwined, watching the harbor lights flicker like constellations brought down to earth. Weeks later, Mercy Harbor moved differently. Ward 4 became a place of innovation rather than neglect. Training sessions blended battlefield efficiency with bedside compassion. Sophie Alvarez was promoted to charge nurse, her confidence growing into something luminous. Ben Maddox took on a permanent advisory role, his humor a steady counterweight to long days. Atlas remained a fixture, unofficial morale officer, age 4 and already legendary. Elena kept her old car. She parked it in the director's space, ignoring the looks it earned. Some reminders were worth keeping. On Christmas Eve, the staff gathered quietly in the atrium. No speeches, no samras, just food, laughter, and the kind of gratitude that didn't need applause. Outside, the Saï was calm, not because storms no longer came, but because they were no. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or parted seas. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, through steady hands that refuse to let go, through courage that stays when running would be easier, through love that shows up even when the world turns its back. If this story taught us anything, it's this. God often works through ordinary people placed in impossible moments. Through a nurse who stayed. Through strangers who chose compassion over comfort. through a heart that kept beating when logic said it shouldn't. In our daily lives, we may never face burning harbors or flashing sirens, but we all face darkness of some kind. A silent fear, a lonely battle, a moment where we wonder if anyone sees us or if what we do truly matters. Let this be your reminder today. God sees you. Your quiet faith matters. Your kindness is never wasted. And even when the lights go out, grace still knows how to find its way. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope right now. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever witnessed a quiet miracle in your own life? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story about courage, redemption, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort the weary, and guide every step you take. Until next time, keep believing